PGS 7 is starting, and with it being the first event of the year, I thought it'd be cool to go over the teams, sort of figure out what to expect, and maybe help you guys with your Twire fantasy picks a little bit in the process. So what I'm gonna try and do in this video is make a tier list to give you a rough idea what people would expect from these teams, and then see how that affects your Twire fantasy picks. I thought it'd be good as a baseline to take the tier list I made with Betulins and Shrimsy from Twisted Minds and Falcons. I have my own ideas about this, but it's a good place to start. It is incredibly hard to predict how someone's gonna do. Added on top of that are potential hot drops, because PGS 7 is the first event of the year. So if you're gonna fight for a spot, you better start now. You don't wanna start late in the year. And also, it's one of the smallest events this year. That sounds a little silly, but all the PGSs are the smallest global in the year. They are not EWC and they're not PGC. The prize pools are completely blown up for EWC and PGC. A single PGS you can sort of justify throwing away. Again, this tier list was made with Shrimsy and Betulins, so Twisted Minds and Falcons are quite high up here. I would personally maybe put them in A tier because the recent form hasn't been amazing. And I think S tier is reserved for teams that have been amazing and look amazing. That's DNF and Pero. DNF dropping 100-point days in Korea on the regular. Pero is doing the same in China, completely dominating their own regions. Each of these teams have made a roster change. Pero bringing on Mingming and Nan, while DNF has brought on Deal, who used to be called Babsan Head, for even more fragging power. Looking nuts, both of them. The expectations are high. They might fumble, but the expectations are really high. A tier is, I think, the absolute favorites for the tournament. I would personally even argue that the Expendables should maybe not be in that list, but they are the PGC winner, so I can sort of justify putting them at the back there. And I would maybe even replace them with GK because I'm from Europe and I'm a little bit biased. But these are teams that I expect to do well, and I expect to potentially win an event. I would not be surprised if any of these teams wins an event. And I would be surprised if one of these teams doesn't make the finals or fumbles completely in both of the events. B tier is a lot of teams that did well in their own regions, starting with T5 and TE from APAC, followed by E-Arena from APAC as well. A lot of the APAC teams look solid in their own region, but it's really hard to say how they're going to do on LAN. I personally think if any of them is going to perform, it's probably Theraton 5. We'll have to wait and see. They look the most solid. E-Arena is definitely very close to them. This is all extremely close. This whole B tier is extremely close to me. It's teams who did well and who I expect to do okay at these LANs. And I wouldn't be shocked if E-Arena gets away with a top 3, for example, or the same for Theraton 5. But I don't expect them to dominate these events, and I don't expect them to dominate both or do really well in both of these events. They're up there in the mix, right? And top 8s are super doable for them. Winning events, I wouldn't assume so. C tier is kind of the teams that I don't expect to do very well. I think Working in Silence, Genji, Too Cool. Not amazing teams, not crazy. TKL, really good, strong fighting team. Not a lot of macro going on. If they get to roll some lobbies, they can easily make a final. And they can get top 10 in the final, maybe something like that. But amongst the best teams in the world, I just don't think they have a chance to shine. Forest is the worst APAC team. They did a slight bit better than the Expendables, which is why in their regional qualifier, which is why I put Expendables in B tier. Getting 6th place in APAC is not a good sign. So Forest, not a lot of expectations. 4AM, by far the worst global partner. Godv is playing again. They've just sold Cyprian, so it's Godv on the roster. Don't expect them to do well at either of these events. They might make a final if they get a few fed zones in the qualifier. Not much I expect. Now, deep breath. I will not be responsible for any of the results of the PGS qualifier. This is a tier list. If I went and circled all the teams that made a roster change since the last year or have never played a club with this roster, half of this almost every team. Almost every team would be circled, right? Like, it's crazy what happened in all these roster changes. Nobody really knows what these teams are going to pull off, and that's what makes it so exciting. Really short update. I've just heard that Diffix from GK will not be at PGS. Apparently there's some visa issues or something, and in that case, they're definitely not an A tier. They're likely a B tier or worse. They're playing with Hiruzen, who's their coach, who's a good player considering that he's a coach, but he's not a player on the roster. And I'd be pretty surprised if they do well, but wish him the best, you know? Always like to see a coach pop off. If you want to get into Twire fantasy, all you have to do is head on over to fantasy.twire and click on PGS 7, and then you can make your own team. The way this works is you get a bit sort of a budget, you can get players, and obviously the players that are expected to perform the best are the most expensive. There's a few strategies for Twire Fantasy. Generally, the goal is obviously to make the most out of your money, right? You are constrained by the money. So you want to pick players that are cheap, compared to what they'll get you. Sometimes picking the most expensive player can still be good if you think he's gonna dominate. Sometimes picking the best player is bad because his team's not gonna do well. I look at this and I immediately see two things. I see Shrimzy at the top. Shrimzy's the GOAT. He's been doing really well regionally. He's generally very consistent as well. I think he's pickable here for 31,000. He's very expensive, but Falcons could do quite well here. Now I see Example here, who's an absolute monster, but his team hasn't done all that well, so his stats are maybe a little pushed down. So that's an instant snatch up for me. And then I see Hakatori on a similar price, who's also an animal, but Navi will be hot dropping on day 1 versus 17, quite likely so. So that's a risky one. I'm probably gonna steer away from that. I'm probably gonna steer clear, not pick up Hakatori, but pick up a Twisted Minds player on day 1 before Pero comes in and hot drops them on day 2. Now we have 60k left, a little tight on the money side. We've got to look for an absolute value champion here. And I'm sort of liking a doozy at 16,000, but I'm thinking Silzen could work out better because that allows me to pick up another BB team player here. And BB team is a team that I think could do really well. So something like Bestalok, for example, doesn't sound all that bad. Silzen is by far my cheapest player, but he can still really pop off. He's a really smart guy. He's not the most cracked, but he's pretty smart. But one thing you can do here when you're at the end and you've sort of figured out the center of your team is you can just look around, right? Oh, what can I afford over Silzen? I've got some money left, right? So what can I afford? I could afford a Mime, for example, or I could go for one of the APAC or China teams, but that's another new kind of risk, right? Picking up a day trade player when I personally think they're not going to do all too well. That's a little risky. What if I pick, for example, a Phil first, and then I look over here? So I can sort of move around a bit, go for a little cheaper or a little bit more expensive, and just smooth out the edges of my team. And now I'm starting to look at something like Pathampong, which has me a little interested, right? T5 could do pretty well. I think they have a good chance of doing well. So maybe I put Rossed in there and then I can look again. That's, I think, once you have the building blocks and you have the players that you really want, which can also be a player for 16,000, you can say, oh my God, like Lou is 17,000. I have to buy that, right? And then that can be your building block. And then you can sort of shift around a bit and try out different configurations and figure out what you're most happy with. I am generally very EU biased, so I end up on a lot of EU players a lot of the time. But I think my best lock Mime is looking pretty okay, but I think I'm just gonna commit to the statistically worse Silzen because he's just the GOAT. The guy wears his headset the wrong way around. I'm not joking. He has something in his brain that makes him hear audio the other way around. So there's nothing you can say. 17, expecting them to be hot drop in. 4 a.m. is 4 a.m. And then, you know, we're giving up 2k here, but I think this is a pretty solid roster. I'm pretty happy with this roster. I'm going to go as far as captaining Example here, even though he's cheaper than Shrimzy. I'm a believer, and I'm a believer in Raining as my sub. Subs don't really matter. Subs only come in if one of your main players goes out. One of your main players does not play. I don't expect that to be the case generally, and it should be okay. If you want to measure yourself against other Acend fans or just a lot of friends from the Acend Discord and the players and me, we're making a private leaderboard for you guys. So you'll just have to maneuver to private leaderboards and search, or we will put a link in the description below so you guys can get in. If you want to win yourself an Acend team shirt, join the leaderboard, win, and it's all yours. Hope you guys enjoyed. This is not financial Twire advice or betting advice, okay? Nobody knows how these events are going to go down. That's what makes them so exciting, but I'm hoping I could give you a bit of an idea of what to expect. I'm hoping I could give you, a bit of clarity, bit of a look in. Can't wait to watch the games. Can't wait to see what's actually going on and how many times I was wrong in this video. And see you guys then.